When people are pushed to their limits, they might make wrongful decisions and could regret them for a lifetime. When individuals are cornered, whether by poverty, social pressure, or emotional turmoil, they are easily swayed by negative emotions and may make mistaken choices. Losing both reason and morality, some commit crimes just to escape immediate suffering, without foreseeing long-term consequences, and sometimes, regret not only haunts them for life, but also causes pain to those around them. The case we're bringing you today touches on this very issue. Hello, welcome back to our channel. At 6 a.m. on May 15, 2003, in the outskirts of Shenyang City, Liaoning Province, China, the early morning sunbeams began to creep across the lush green cornfields. Ms. Lauren Quinn, 55 years old, along with her 6-year-old granddaughter Amy, was walking on a dirt path towards their family's cornfield. The two were chatting cheerfully about the upcoming bountiful harvest. Suddenly, Ms. Quinn's granddaughter Amy noticed a pair of sandals discarded near the edge of an irrigation ditch. What was noteworthy was that the sandals looked very new, not like something old that someone had thrown away. Feeling curious and a bit regretful seeing such new sandals abandoned, the little girl approached. The sight before her made the 6-year-old scream in terror. Seeing her granddaughter run back, crying and panicking, Ms. Quinn became extremely curious. While trying to ask her granddaughter what happened, she walked closer to where the sandals were left, only to be horrified to find a man lying motionless in the cornfield beside the irrigation ditch. Looking closely for a moment, Ms. Quinn recognized him as Mr. Charles Hart, 60 years old, from the same village. Thinking he might have fainted from heat stroke while visiting his field early, she approached to wake Mr. Hart, but found his entire body motionless and no longer breathing. Horrified, Ms. Quinn quickly took her granddaughter's hand and ran back to the village to call for help from the villagers and to inform Mr. Hart's family. At the same time, Mr. Frank Pham, 56 years old, the village chief, quickly called to report the incident to the local police. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately advised the man to try to preserve the scene, not allowing any villagers near where the body was discovered to prevent the scene from being disturbed, because the possibility of this being a murder could not be ruled out without a thorough examination. About 30 minutes after receiving the report, the police quickly arrived at the scene. When the police arrived, the area where the body was found was already surrounded by many villagers. Although Village Chief Pham tried to prevent people from approaching the scene, it was impossible to avoid someone unintentionally getting close. Earlier, at that moment, a piercing cry came from within the crowd. A woman in a blue floral shirt was tightly hugging the victim's body. According to local residents, she was Ms. Lisa Miller, 57 years old, the victim's wife. It took some time for the police to separate Ms. Miller from the body, after which they quickly cordoned off the crime scene. The victim was identified as Mr. Charles Hart, 60 years old, living in Man Khao Village on the outskirts of Shenyang City, Liaoning Province, China. Mr. Charles Hart's body was found lying on its side next to a water ditch in a dense cornfield. His face was pale, his lips purple, his eyes wide open, and there were dried white foam stains at the corners of his mouth. Initial signs suggested a high probability that the victim had been poisoned. There were no obvious injuries on his body, but his neck and abdomen showed signs of convulsions before death. On the victim's body, a distinct alcohol-like smell was still present on his clothes and in his oral cavity, as if the victim had consumed alcohol beforehand. So the possibility that the victim suffered a stroke and died in the cornfield could not be ruled out. The crime scene investigation team immediately sealed off the area and began collecting evidence. The new sandal found lying alone a few meters from the body was carefully marked for forensic examination. Nearby, there were muddy drag marks leading out of the cornfield, suggesting that a second person might have been present at the scene before the victim was discovered. The victim's body was quickly placed on a stretcher and transported to the city's forensic center for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. The investigation team continued to thoroughly search the scene, while also compiling a list of people who had close relationships or contact with Mr. Charles Hart. Within 24 hours before his death, at the Shenyang City Forensic Center, Charles Hart's body was taken to the cold room that same morning to prepare for the autopsy. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Lawrence Lamb, a highly experienced professional, was directly in charge of this autopsy. After completing the preparatory steps, he and his team began the internal organ examination to check for signs of poisoning and internal injuries. As soon as the abdominal and thoracic cavities were opened, many abnormalities quickly became apparent. The victim's stomach contained a lot of undigested fluid, which had a strange pungent smell and a slightly greenish tint, a common sign in cases of chemical poisoning. The victim's liver and kidneys also showed signs of congestion, with an abnormally dark color. Meanwhile, the gastric mucosa showed signs of acute inflammation and localized corrosion. The doctors immediately took samples of gastric fluid, blood, liver, and kidneys to send for toxicology testing. Upon examining the throat and oral cavity, the inner lining also showed signs of strong irritation. Small capillaries had ruptured, creating tiny red spots. This reinforced the hypothesis that the victim had ingested a poison, either in liquid form or dissolved in food or drink. While the biological samples were being transferred to the forensic chemistry lab for toxicological analysis, the examination team continued to carefully inspect the victim's fingernails, hand skin, and clothing. Under Mr. Charles Hart's fingernails, there were some fine particles, suspected to be food or soil, which were collected for examination. The clothing showed no signs of a struggle, but the collar of his shirt had a few faint stains, unclear whether from food, pesticide, or another substance, which were also carefully sampled. Everything found suggested this was not a natural death or a health-related incident, but the result of exposure to a strong poison. Based on the state of the internal organs and the estimated time of death, forensic experts determined that the victim might have ingested or consumed the poison approximately 30 minutes to 1 hour before death. After 3 hours of work, the test results showed that the main cause of the victim's death was acute poisoning with Proquat, an extremely toxic herbicide common in agriculture, but banned in many countries due to its high level of danger. When this substance enters the body through the digestive tract, it causes severe damage to the lungs, liver, and kidneys, leading to multiple organ failure and rapid death if not treated promptly. Based on body temperature, muscle stiffness, and initial signs of decomposition, forensics estimated the time of death to be between 5 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. on the morning of May 15, 2003, after the forensic results determined that Mr. Charles Hart died from acute Proquat poisoning, a highly toxic herbicide. The police launched an in-depth investigation into the victim's personal relationships, finances, and recent conflicts. Mr. Charles Hart lived with his wife, Ms. Lisa Miller, his 29-year-old daughter-in-law Helen Pham, and his 7-year-old grandson Kevin Cheng in a small house at the end of the village. His only son, Victor Cheng, 31 years old, was currently working as a construction engineer in the city and rarely came home. Although the family life appeared calm on the surface, according to local residents, Mr. Hart had underlying conflicts with his son regarding land division. While he wanted to keep the ancestral field for his own cultivation, Victor wanted to sell the land to raise capital for business investments, leading to persistent arguments where Ms. Lisa Miller and her daughter-in-law often had to mediate. Financially, Charles Hart had recently borrowed about 20,000 yuan from a villager named Mark Ma, owner of an agricultural supply store. Mark Ma had been seen visiting Mr. Hart's house multiple times to demand repayment, with unfriendly exchanges of words. Mr. Hart's failure to repay on time strained the relationship between the two. Additionally, Mr. Hart had also had a dispute with Mr. Brian Bai, a neighbor cultivating an adjacent field, over the irrigation water system. This dispute had been mediated by the village authorities, but was not fully resolved. Many people recounted Mr. Bai loudly declaring he would teach Mr. Hart a lesson if he continued to block the water flow to his field. Based on these details about Mr. Charles Hart's conflicting social relationships, the police immediately summoned the identified individuals to the police Station for investigation. Markma's interrogation was conducted on the morning of May 17th. In the investigation room, Murma admitted that Mr. Charles Hart owed him 20,000 yuan and had not yet repaid it. He stated that a few days before Hart's death, he had gone to his house to collect the debt, but it was only an exchange of words. No physical altercation occurred. When asked about the source of paraquat, he admitted to selling this type of herbicide. But according to new local regulations, all sales had to be recorded with the buyer's name, quantity, and purpose of use. Murma also provided the police with his sales ledger, which showed that on May 10th, he had sold paraquat to a villager named Louis Liu. This person worked as a weed remover for hire in the village and had no connection to the victim. Additionally, Mr. Ma provided an alibi, stating that on the evening of May 14th and the morning of May 15th, he was at home with his wife and son watching television because there was a football match between China and Iran. A neighbor's security camera also clearly showed Mr. Ma standing on his porch smoking until nearly 6 a.m., coinciding with the time the victim was found dead. The police confirmed he had an alibi and temporarily removed him from the list of suspects. That same afternoon, the police summoned Mr. Brian Bai to clarify the long-standing conflict with the victim over the irrigation system. When questioned, Murbai admitted he had argued loudly with Mr. Hart, but it was only about farming matters and not a deep-seated grudge. On the day of the incident, he and Mr. Hart had encountered each other at the field entrance, each going about their own business without any confrontation. When asked if he had any contact with paraquat, Murbai stated he had stopped using that herbicide since last year due to health concerns. He explained that on the evening of May 14th, he had gone to his younger sister's house in the neighboring commune, about 4 kilometers away, for their mother's death anniversary. The police also verified his presence at the anniversary gathering from 6 p.m. until the next morning, with many witnesses, including a local village official. Hart's time of death was estimated to be between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., so Murbai was confirmed to have a clear alibi. And finally, the victim's biological son, Victor Cheng, 31 years old, who was said to have a land dispute with Mr. Charles Hart. At the interrogation late that same evening, Victor appeared quite surprised that he was also listed as a suspect by the police, because according to the information Victor provided, he often worked far from home and rarely returned, and recently, due to disagreements with his father about land, he hadn't been home for 2 weeks and had been staying at the construction site. Furthermore, at the time Mr. Charles Hart met his demise, Victor was still in the dormitory for employees, only rushing back to his hometown after his mother informed him of his father's death. The journey from Victor's workplace to his home by bus took about 3 hours. After recording Victor Cheng's statement, the police quickly verified it and found it completely consistent with what he had claimed. Therefore, Victor Cheng was also removed from the list of suspects in the case. After investigating the victim's social relationships and conflicts, the police had temporarily not obtained any useful information. At this point, the police began to shift their focus to investigating individuals who had direct access to the victim for the paraquat poison to enter the victim's body. It must have been through food or drink. The investigation team also reviewed people who could have had direct access to the victim's food or drink between the afternoon of May 14th and the early morning of May 15th. Ms. Lisa Miller, the victim's wife, was the main cook in the family. She stated that on the morning of the incident, Hart did not eat breakfast, but only took a bottle of water and a steamed bun with him. However, what caught the police's attention was that the daughter-in-law, Helen Pham, was also in the house and often prepared breakfast for Hart when Ms. Miller was busy looking after her grandchild. The presence of 3 generations under one roof widened the circle of suspicion, especially considering the in-law relationship. Besides external conflicts, investigators paid special attention to relationships and dynamics within the victim's family. Although living in the same house, according to neighbors, the atmosphere in Mr. Charles Hart's family was sometimes quite tense. Helen Pham was described as a quiet, reserved person, somewhat distant from her father-in-law. Some villagers believed that there had been friction between them due to differences in raising the grandson and assigning household chores recently. There were rumors that Helen had applied for a job in an industrial park near the city. This raised suspicions that she wanted to leave the house with her son, escaping family conflicts. Moreover, about 3 days before the incident, a neighbor reported seeing Merhart arguing fiercely with his wife in the yard. Although the content was unclear, Ms. Lisa Miller later went into the house with an angry expression. While Mr. Hart left for the fields early in the morning, this incident could indicate psychological pressure and accumulated tension within the family before the death occurred. After obtaining this information, the police also concluded that there were underlying conflicts within the victim's family, which could very well have been the trigger for the murder. On the morning of May 18th, Ms. Lisa Miller was invited to the police station for questioning. She was asked in detail about the recent argument with Mr. Hart. She stated that she and her husband had lived together for decades. They had disagreements, but she never thought of harming him. That morning, she didn't cook anything new, just reheated the previous day's rice and food. When Mr. Hart went to the fields, she was still washing dishes. Police confirmed Ms. Miller did not have separate contact with Mr. Hart's food or water bottle. The estimated time of death coincided with when she was at home with her grandson, confirmed by a next-door neighbor, because the neighbor saw the grandmother and grandson watering flowers in the yard around 5:15 a.m., and there were no suspicious signs or clear motives. Ms. Lisa Miller was also temporarily removed from the list of suspects. The interrogation of Helen Pham, the victim's daughter-in-law, took place that same afternoon. Living in the same house, Helen was suspected because she had direct access to Mr. Hart's food and drink. When asked about her relationship with her father-in-law, Helen stated that they had minor arguments occasionally about raising her child or household chores, but there was no animosity. She said that on the morning of the incident, Mr. Hart had breakfast at home, but only ate leftover rice and drank water from the family's shared water container. She also provided an important detail that both she and her son used the same water source and ate the same food the day before, with no unusual symptoms. To verify this, the police took the remaining water sample from the container for testing. The result was negative for Proquat. Additionally, at 5 a.m., Helen Pham had started preparing breakfast for her son to go to kindergarten, which matched the time her neighbor, Miss Tracy, saw her open the door to get vegetables from the yard. There was no evidence to suggest she had contact with or motive to poison the victim. She was also temporarily removed from the list of suspects. At this point, everyone under suspicion had alibis. The investigation gradually reached a stalemate. On the afternoon of May 23rd, a man named Mr. Leo Lee, 62 years old, living in the same village as the victim, suddenly came to the police station to report someone with unusual behavior. Murley stated that since the case occurred, a villager named Liam Lynn, 33 years old, had been showing unusual behavior, not seen before. Once an active and energetic person who often helped villagers in the fields or played chess at neighbors' houses, Liam Lynn had become almost a different person since Mr. Charles Hart's death. According to Murley, Liam suddenly became quiet and withdrawn, hardly went out, and no longer interacted with anyone in the village. He stayed indoors all day with the door shut, and sometimes people even noticed his door remained closed for the entire day. Acquaintances said that even when someone knocked on his door or invited him for a meal or gathering, Liam Lynn would refuse with a dazed look. He avoided eye contact and often wandered off when someone mentioned Mr. Hart's death. Notably, according to Mr. Lee, a few days before Mr. Hart's body was found, he had also seen Liam Lynn standing outside Mr. Hart's cornfield before dawn, looking thoughtful as if planning something. This information immediately caught the police's attention, not initially among the suspects. Liam Lynn had not been included in the investigation list before and had no close relationship or open conflict with the victim. However, his unusual psychological change and his appearance at a sensitive time made him a name that needed clarification. The very next morning, the police gathered information about this man and decided to summon Liam Lynn for a preliminary meeting and questioning. Liam Lin, 33 years old, was a single man living alone in a simple house about 200 meters from Mr. Charles Hart's home. He was born and raised in the village, finished high school, and then did various manual labor jobs such as assistant mason, hired gardener, and cargo porter for local shops. Although not eloquent, Liam Lin was previously considered gentle, hardworking, and sociable. However, due to difficult family circumstances, his parents died early. He lived a mostly reclusive life, without many close relationships. As police delved deeper into Liam Lin's background and personal connections, a noteworthy detail gradually emerged. According to information gathered from neighbors and some acquaintances, Liam Lin had once worked at a garment factory in town about 5 years ago, which was also where Helen Pham, Mr. Charles Hart's daughter-in-law, had worked part-time after her first child was born. During their time working together, the two had a rather close relationship. Some even suggested they had an ambiguous romantic involvement, and that was also the reason why the relationship between Helen Pham and her parents-in-law became less than ideal later when Helen Pham married Victor Chang and moved into her in-laws' house. Contact between her and Liam Lin seemed to be cut off, but on a few occasions, villagers still saw Liam Lin loitering near Mr. Charles Hart's house, especially when Victor Chang was not at home. The detail about the clandestine relationship between Liam Lin and the victim's daughter-in-law immediately made the police pay special attention. The police raised the question of whether Mr. Charles Hart's death was related to a hidden affair. In the interrogation room, Liam Lin showed surprise mixed with anxiety and tension when summoned. The interrogation began with questions about his schedule on May 15th. Faced with the police's questions, Liam Lin calmly replied, on that day, he slept at home alone, did not go out, and had no one to confirm this. When asked about his relationship with Mr. Charles Hart, Liam Lin said he only knew him casually, was not close, and had no conflict. However, when the investigator unexpectedly mentioned Helen Pham by name, Liam Lin's eyes faltered. Initially, he tried to maintain composure, denying any special relationship with the victim's daughter-in-law. However, after the police presented evidence from a former colleague at the garment factory who confirmed Liam Lin and Helen Pham were once very close, Liam Lin's expression gradually changed. After a period of questioning, Liam Lin finally had to tell the truth. He admitted that he had deep feelings for Helen Pham during their time working together at the factory, but when he learned she was preparing to get married, he chose to leave and cut off contact. However, his feelings never faded. Later, knowing Helen Pham lived nearby, he couldn't control his emotions when police asked about the hypothesis that their relationship had been discovered by Mr. Hart, leading him to harm the victim. He quickly shook his head. However, his flustered demeanor made it impossible for investigators to ignore. This further increased police suspicion that Mr. Hart's death was highly likely related to Liam Lin. When the police suddenly asked if he had recently purchased any herbicides, pesticides, or any agricultural chemicals, Liam Lin suddenly became agitated, his hands involuntarily clenched. His answer somewhat hesitant, but he adamantly insisted he had not bought any of the substances mentioned by the police. However, when police cross-referenced Liam Lin's statement with records of customers who had purchased agricultural chemicals related to paraquat, Liam Lin's name suddenly appeared. His information was recorded as having purchased 2 bottles of herbicide containing a small amount of paraquat from a fertilizer store about 5 kilometers from his home on June 27, 2003. Note: the date in the original text might be a typo, as the death was May 15, 2003. Paraquat purchase should predate this. I'll assume the text meant a date before May 15th, or this detail is a point of confusion in the narrative itself that I should reflect. For now, I'll keep it as June 27, 2003, as per original, but flag this mentally. This new evidence was completely different from what Liam Lin had previously stated, proving he was trying to hide a shocking secret. When the police presented the records from the agricultural supply store, which clearly showed Liam Lin's name, the specific date, and the quantity of herbicide purchased, the atmosphere in the interrogation room became more tense than ever, accompanied by the sales receipt with a signature confirming the purchase. All of Liam Lynn's attempts at denial immediately became futile, faced with irrefutable evidence. His face gradually turned pale, his eyes wavered slightly, and sweat poured down his forehead. After sitting motionless for a while, Liam Lynn began to admit that he had gone to the store to buy herbicide. However, he insisted his initial purpose was to clear weeds in his backyard because it had rained a lot at that time and the overgrown weeds were obstructing passage. He said that after using a little, he forgot the bottle in the storage shed and hadn't touched it since. However, the police found this reason unconvincing, especially when, based on forensic results, the amount of paraquat found in Mr. Charles Hart's body was very high, far exceeding what could be accidentally contracted through contact. Additionally, the police immediately obtained a warrant to search Liam Lynn's home. There, in the storage shed behind the house, they found two nearly empty herbicide bottles with labels matching the type he had purchased. According to store records, what was particularly striking was that the bottle caps showed signs of being wiped clean, thoroughly, but when chemical trace tests were conducted in the lab, paraquat traces were still found on the bottle walls and even on the storage shed's doorknob. At the same time, neighbors also provided crucial additional information. Someone had seen Liam Lynn near Mr. Charles Hart's house at dawn a few days before his death, under the pretext of looking for a lost dog. An elderly villager clearly remembered seeing the figure of a man in dark clothes lurking at the entrance of Mr. Hart's alley around 4 a.m. that day. Feeling very surprised, the mounting evidence, along with his inability to provide a concrete alibi for the time of the victim's death, officially made Liam Lynn the prime suspect. However, the case still had unresolved knots. How was paraquat introduced into Mr. Charles Hart's body? At this point, Ms. Lisa Miller, the victim's wife, unexpectedly reported a very important detail she had just remembered. Ms. Miller said her husband had a habit of bringing water with him whenever he went to the fields on the day of the incident. Ms. Miller clearly remembered Mr. Hart carrying a 15-liter green plastic water bottle. However, during the crime scene search in the cornfield where the body was found, the police did not find any water bottle near the victim. This proved that the culprit had intentionally disposed of the water bottle, and it was highly probable that the water bottle the victim carried contained the poison. Information from Ms. Lisa Miller immediately caught the police's attention. The absence of the personal water bottle, considered an indispensable item whenever Mr. Charles Hart went to the fields, could not be a coincidence. The investigation team immediately organized a search around the field, including the ditch, bushes, and small paths leading into the village. After nearly a day of searching, they found a green plastic bottle discarded in a bush about 300 meters from the scene. The bottle was slightly crushed, missing its cap, but still contained a small amount of liquid inside. Immediately, the liquid sample was sent to the lab for analysis. The test results were as expected. The water contained a high concentration of paraquat, matching the poison found in Mr. Charles Hart's internal organs. Notably, the water sample smelled of jasmine tea, consistent with the type of tea Mr. Hart usually drank, and the bottle had the victim's fingerprints. This confirmed he had directly used this water bottle before his death. The police also proceeded to check for remaining fingerprints on the water bottle. Fortunately, since the incident, the local weather had not included any rainy days, so the fingerprints were still quite intact. After just 3 hours of work, cross-referencing information and local citizen data, the results showed that besides the victim's fingerprints, there were 2 other sets of fingerprints on the water bottle, belonging to Helen Pham and Liam Lynn. From this newly acquired evidence, the police could definitively confirm that Mr. Charles Hart's death was directly linked to these 2 individuals. Immediately, the police urgently summoned Helen Pham to the station to give a statement. At the police station, Helen Pham appeared calm when invited for questioning, even trying to maintain a composed expression as if nothing concerned her. However, when the investigator presented evidence of her fingerprints on the water bottle, an exhibit confirmed to contain paraquat poison, Helen Pham's expression immediately changed. She showed a fleeting look of confusion. Her eyes wavered, and she began to be evasive when answering questions. The police quickly focused on this detail, questioning why her fingerprints were on the water bottle Mr. Charles Hart had carried on the day of his death. Helen Pham then just remained silent, her head bowed towards the table, her hands clasped tightly, and she offered no answer. Seeing Helen Pham continuously maintain silence, the police mentioned the relationship between her and Liam Lynn, who also had fingerprints on the bottle and had previously confessed to having feelings for her. The police presented the testimony of a witness, Helen's old close friend from the garment factory, who confirmed that Helen had recently been intimately involved with Liam Lynn. Faced with increasingly clear evidence and pressure from investigators, Helen Pham finally broke down. After a long period of silence, she agreed to truthfully confess her actions. Helen Pham recounted that she and Liam Lynn had been in an extramarital affair for the past 2 years. During that time, her husband, Victor Chang, was constantly away from home for work in the city, only returning occasionally, which made her feel empty and lonely initially. Casual conversations with Liam Lynn were mere sharing, but gradually, the attention from this fellow villager became her emotional support, leading to secret meetings and then crossing the line. Everything proceeded quietly until Mr. Charles Hart discovered it. It was unclear when he found out, only that one day, over a month ago, he called her to the backyard, his voice full of anger but also deep disappointment. Mr. Hart didn't hit or scold her, just coldly demanded she end everything immediately. He said he was silent not for her sake, but for his innocent grandchild, who didn't deserve to live in a broken family, and also to save face for his son who was struggling to make a living far away. However, after that conversation, Helen Pham not only didn't end the relationship, but felt increasingly threatened. She feared Mr. Hart wouldn't keep his word, and that one day he wouldn't be able to restrain himself from telling her husband everything, and then everything would collapse. In desperation, she discussed with Liam Lynn ways to eliminate the threat, taking advantage of Mr. Hart's daily habit of carrying water to the fields. Helen Pham put Paraquat into his water bottle. To avoid suspicion, Helen Pham carefully asked her lover, Liam Lynn, to help buy 2 bottles of the poison. Feigning a different motive, half the plan was complete. The rest was waiting for the victim to drink the water from the bottle and be poisoned. Early on the morning of July 15th, note, original was May 15th. This July 15th in this part of the source text is likely a typo. I'll assume it should be May 15th to align with the case timeline. Liam Lynn woke up particularly early and went to Mr. Charles Hart's cornfield. After observing the entire process of the victim being poisoned and dying, he calmly approached, took the poisoned water bottle and disposed of it. Not only that, he also staged it to look like a common case of fainting from a stroke. Liam Lynn meticulously poured more alcohol into the victim's mouth and around his body to deceive the investigating authorities. By mid-morning, after hearing that Mr. Charles Hart's body had been found in the field, Helen Pham still pretended to be heartbroken, mourning her elderly father-in-law. She thought her murder plan was perfect, but the wicked woman couldn't have imagined her crimes would be exposed so quickly. The trial for the case of the daughter-in-law conspiring with her lover to murder her father-in-law took place on May 6, 2004. The case, which had shocked public opinion for months, drew a large crowd of people to observe. From early morning, the area around the courthouse was packed. Everyone wore expressions of curiosity, shock, and even horror at the severity of the incident. Inside the courtroom, Helen Pham appeared haggard, her face gaunt, walking silently with her head bowed. She never once looked up at the crowd. Opposite her, Liam Lynn was also led in, handcuffed, his face dazed, his complexion pale, unable to hide his panic, according to the case file. After Mr. Charles Hart, Helen Pham's father-in-law, discovered the illicit relationship between her and Liam Lynn, he demanded Helen end it immediately to preserve the family's honor and protect his young grandson. However, instead of ending it, Helen harbored resentment, fearing exposure, which led to discussions with her lover to murder Mr. Hart to silence him. Liam Lynn, blinded by love, helped Helen Pham buy the herbicide containing Paraquat and disposed of evidence, as well as faking the victim's death to mislead authorities based on the severity of the crime. The trial panel concluded that Helen Pham's actions were particularly egregious, demonstrating coldness, premeditation, and inhumanity in murdering her own family member. Helen Pham was sentenced to death for organized murder. As for Liam Lynn, although he did not directly commit the murder, he aided by providing the means for the crime and did not prevent the crime. The court sentenced Liam Lynn to 18 years in prison for his role as an accomplice and for desecrating the deceased's body. When the verdict was announced, the entire courtroom fell silent. Some villagers shed tears, not out of pity for the perpetrators, but from a sense of pain for a shattered family, a young woman, a blindly infatuated lover, a life unjustly taken, all because of blind passion and personal selfishness. The case of Helen Pham and Liam Lynn murdering Mr. Charles Hart is not just a family tragedy, but also a reflection of the darker aspects of human nature, where blind love, selfishness, and the fear of exposure lead to a cruel and heartbreaking crime. What makes the case particularly haunting is that the perpetrator was not a stranger, but the daughter-in-law, someone who lived under the same roof, who had received care and protection from the victim. Helen Pham's actions not only took her father-in-law's life, but also shattered a three-generation family, pushing her own child into becoming motherless at the age of 4. It was a double tragedy, losing a loved one and losing a home. Liam Lynn, as an accomplice, is a typical example of weakness and moral deviation in affection. Instead of preventing it, he abetted a murder plan just to hold onto an inescapable love affair. In many people's eyes, he is not just a criminal, but also a man without backbone, without reason, easily swayed by misguided emotions. The case makes one reflect on many things: the fragility of trust within a family, the consequences of clandestine relationships, and above all, moral values being eroded by a pragmatic, irresponsible lifestyle. If Helen Pham could have stopped when discovered, if Liam Lynn could have been more clear-headed, if both had enough courage to face the consequences of their mistake instead of choosing murder to silence the issue, then perhaps Mr. Charles Hart would still be alive, and the little grandson would still have a complete family. After all, the case is not just a closed file with a death sentence or years of imprisonment, but a wake-up call for anyone standing on the borderline of morality and desire. A mistake, however small, if not stopped in time, can lead to irremediable consequences. This case also concludes today's video. What do you think about this case? Please leave your comments below to let us know. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive notifications for the latest videos. For now, goodbye and see you again.